Hello and welcome to another episode of our Brothers Creed podcast, where we talk about motivation, experiences, and exploring the world around us. We're the Thomas brothers, and I'm Jared.
And I'm Ethan, and today we're going to be talking about chivalry. We're going to be talking about the warrior's code of the knights.
That's right.
I say a couple episodes back, maybe 30 episodes back, we talked about the samurai code of Bushido.
That was a Patreon episode. Did we release that one?
Yeah, we did.
Oh yeah, that was good.
And it was a Patreon episode, but then we released it a couple months later to our all of our listeners. But yeah, we kind of talked about some of that warrior code, and then Jared and I were talking about knights in the medieval times, and we were like, man, let's talk about chivalry. That was kind of like the warrior's code of the medieval knights.
Yep.
So today we're going to get into that. We're going to talk about a little bit of the history and what it is. And maybe a little bit about chivalry today.
Yeah, let's dive in.
All right, let's do it.
Spartans! What is your profession?
Any man who must say, I am the king, is no true king.
What I do have are a very particular set of skills. Skills that make me a nightmare.
If I can change, and you can change, everybody can change!
Let us all unite! Let us fight for a new world, a decent world.
So the Code of Chivalry goes back many, many moons, and it has so many facets, and it's involved in many different ways from the year 1170 AD all the way up until kind of right before World War One. Right at World War One. So the Code of, first of all, just talk about what is it. The Code of Chivalry is kind of a moral system which went beyond the rules of combat and introduced concepts of chivalrous conduct, qualities, idealized by the medieval knights, such as bravery, courtesy, honor, and great gallantry towards women. So the Code of Chivalry also incorporated notions of courtly love. The Code of Chivalry was the honor code of the knight. The Code of Chivalry was also an important part of the society and lives of people who lived during the medieval times and was understood by all. So chivalry was actually developed by the French around the mid-12th century, but adopted its structure in kind of in a European context. They actually also had heavily influenced culture from the Arabs. The Arabs actually conquered right at the bottom part of Spain, the Andalusian peninsula, kind of the bottom part of Spain there. The Arabs had conquered that, and they had this very notion of chivalry and knighthood and this kind of thing. So that really influenced the culture. And so chivalry means horsemanship in Old French. So the French word chevalier originally meant a man of aristocratic standing and probably a noble ancestry who is capable of, if called upon, of equipping himself with a war horse and arms of heavily cavalrymen, and who has been through certain rituals and make him what he is. So therefore, during the Middle Ages, the plural chevalier transformed into the word chivalry, originally denoted by the body of heavy cavalry upon formation in the field. In English, the term appears in 1292. Note that cavalry is from the Italian word from the same word, same form of the word. So cavalry. We talked about that.
Yeah.
Cavalry.
Cavalry, the
That's
horseback.
Horseback kind of troops. That one's hard to say. Most people say cavalry. I think we had that argument.
Yeah, we
once.
did have we had that discussion.
That was Hatfield and McCoy's, I think.
No, it wasn't. That was we were talking about.
That was Spartacus.
Spartacus.
Yeah. So the code can basically be broken down into the three major parts, and we're going to talk more about this. But there's, first of all, the duties to countrymen and fellow Christians. So this contains virtues such as mercy, courage, valor, fairness, protection of the weak and the poor, and in the servanthood of the knight to his lord. This also brings with the idea of being willing to give one's life for another's, whether he would be giving his life for a poor man or his lord. So the second kind of category here is duties to God. This would contain certain being faithful to God, protecting the innocent, being faithful to the church, being the champion of good against evil, being generous and obeying God above the feudal lords. And the third one is duties to women. This is probably the most familiar aspect of chivalry. This would contain what is often called courtly love, the idea that the knight is to serve a lady, and after her all other ladies, most especially in the category in general gentleness, graciousness to all women. So,
I think that's a lot of times where kind of it was so romanticized, right? And a lot of these historical accounts that we have of chivalry and of knighthood were actually written down by clergymen, and they were almost written in poems and songs, and maybe potentially dramatized a little bit, and fantasized a little bit. And so I think that's kind of one of the where a lot of that comes from.
Yeah, one of the ones here is the Code of Chivalry was documented in an epic poem called the Song of Roland. The Song of Roland describes the 8th century king of the Dark Ages and the battles fought by the Emperor Charlemagne. The code has since been described as Charlemagne's Code of Chivalry. The Song of Roland was written between 1098 and 1100 and describes the betrayal of Count Roland at the hand of Ganelon. Roland was a loyal defender of his liege lord Charlemagne, and his code of conduct became understood as a code of chivalry. The code of chivalry described in the Song of Roland and the excellent representations of the knights' code of chivalry are as follows. And Ethan's going to talk about some of these codes that came out of that song.
Yeah. So really, it's kind of this idea of medieval knightly system of chivalry is kind of broken into what I felt was kind of a religious, moral, and then and social code. And by some definitions, it was more of a guideline, right? Yeah. It was more of a suggestion, and it wasn't particularly written down, maybe. And I'm sure you had some knights that kind of opposed some of these chivalrous traits. But then others defended it as specifically, these are the qualifications that are required to become a knight. And you would lose your knighthood if you abandon these qualifications or these standards. It makes me think of the story of Lancelot, right? In King Arthur's court, he came in and stole Guinevere away from
King Arthur.
Some kind of adulterous relationship with Guinevere. And that wasn't very chivalrous, right?
Well, yeah, that's actually interesting. I was looking into that. That was so there's a lot of literature about knights and chivalry and this romantic nature around it. And it was very prolific during the Middle Ages, even up to today. I mean, you get these old stories like, Rapunzel or Sleeping Beauty or these different things where the knight comes and saves the woman, and it's just a chivalrous, he uses his military prowess to do that. And so with Lancelot, it's kind of a weird thing because it's like he's not being chivalrous, but he's putting his love for her above all else,
which is chivalrous,
and
their love was overcame all, and
yeah. So it's kind of a weird thing, and so they were kind of saying, well, even though he was in an extramarital affair, he was very in love and treated her with so much respect. And there's one story where he finds one of her golden hairs and he wants to look at it so closely that he literally is like poking his eyes with her hair because he's just so much in love with her. And so it's kind of a funny thing that
sounds like hyperbole. So yeah, it's interesting that code really was in the medieval era was understood to be a set of rules that were not only on the battlefield but also beyond combat. That should be held within society, but as well as on the battlefield. There were certain things that you were supposed to and not supposed to do. So some of these vows of knighthood are, let's see. So the first one is fear God and His church. Second
maintain His church.
Yeah, and maintain His church. And then second one is serve the liege lord in valor and faith. And we're talking about Lord there. I don't think they're talking about Lord God. No, they're talking about your liege lord. So like my liege, so the lord of whoever they're serving, the king or whoever else. The next is to protect the weak and defenseless, live by honor and for glory, and then the last one is respect and honor women. These were kind of the 5 ones that were the vows of knighthood, and there's lots of different aspects and attributes that these knights had specifically. And I'm going to get a little bit more into here. Jared was talking about the La Chevaliers were kind of the word where chivalry came from, that ancient French aspect to it. They give a popular summary of this ancient code in something that's called the 10 Commandments of Chivalry.
Before you jump into the 10 Commandments of Chivalry, I just wanted to mention a couple of the ones from the Song of Roland that I thought were good.
Do it.
Never turn your back to a foe.
Nice.
Never refuse a challenge from an equal. And then I think it's interesting. It says to refrain from wanton giving of offense. I've just been thinking about that.
What does that mean?
That means just like offending people for just like no reason.
Just being a jerk.
Like, don't be an a-hole, basically. To guard the honor of fellow knights also is one. It's like, so you're in this brotherhood, a Masonic brotherhood, if you will.
Yeah, episode.
Probably will. They were Knights Templar,
episode
right?
67.
Yeah, so very interesting. Those were a couple of the ones I liked.
Yeah, so the 10 Commandments, actually a couple of those were in the 10 Commandments. So the 10 Commandments of Chivalry include the following commandments. So one is believe the church's teachings and observe all of the church's directions. 2 is defend the church. I think it's really interesting how closely it is related with the Christian church at that time. It's just really interesting, that relationship. So number 3 is...
Well, a lot of it was through the Crusades.
Yeah.
And so there was very heavily steeped in that, because it was not just about being in battle, but it was about being a good Christian.
Yeah. Well, we haven't even mentioned it. I mean, this is a Brothers Creed podcast. I mean, these are like basically tenets of building. This is a creed. I mean, this is their credo. This is the creed of the knights. The creed of chivalry. I mean, the certain of these aspects, I think all of them can be potentially good, but certain of these aspects can help us to build our own personal creeds.
And that's why we're exploring this. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, this is the reason. So number 3 is respect and defend the weak. Number 4 is love your country. Number 5 is do not fear your enemy. Number 6 is show no mercy and do not hesitate to make war with the infidel.
I think that's where that Arabic influence comes in, a little bit.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. Don't hesitate to, show no mercy. Don't hesitate to make war with the infidel. So number 7 is perform all your feudal duties as long as they do not conflict with the laws of God. I thought this was interesting in talking about kind of like the laws of the land versus the laws of God. And so it's saying perform all of your duties unless they conflict with a higher law. Maybe the spirit of the law, or something that if you don't feel that something is right in God's eyes, then even if it's legal on paper, or if maybe you're a police officer and you are supporting something that is not, that maybe is taking away people's rights or freedoms, So that was kind of an interesting comparison there. Number 8 is never lie or go back on one's word.
Well, what you said, going back to the prior one, is like, also it had said previously that your loyalty is to God and His church, even above your liege lord.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like we talk about, people have they are police officers our members of the armed services, they say they promise to defend the Constitution, but and even then beyond that, God Himself, and so that makes you question like, well, when people go up, if you're in the army, you're a police officer, and you're going around and doing some of this stuff that you're like, well, I totally disagree with this, but I got to make a living. It's like, okay, well, you're giving up, like you're not living by that. You're not living by this creed,
and that is such a hard place to be in. Am I going to, play it? Am I just gonna go with the flow and keep my job and my career and everything else, or am I gonna fight against something that I feel is not right? That's hard.
Yeah, absolutely. But fighting, choosing to go along with something is, I think, different. Well,
than not fighting against.
Than fighting for that thing.
It can be a passive,
or you can be an active player in it.
Yeah,
too.
It could be passive rebellion, or it could be active rebellion.
So, like, if you're the police officer and you're going over to people's houses, giving them tickets because they were
mowing their lawn without a mask on.
Their kids were playing at the neighbor's house, and everybody's supposed to be quarantined. It's like, well, who do you serve? Like.
Yeah.
Is this the type of obedience that who's your master, kind of a thing?
Yeah. Interesting. So next one is never lie or go back on one's word. Number 9, be generous. And number 10, always and everywhere be right and good against evil and injustice. Mm-hmm. So those are kind of the 10 commandments of chivalry.
I like that. And there's another list I have here that's more like the scout, scout law. A scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly. Those kind of attributes. So in this one, you could say a knight has faith, charity, justice, sagacity. I'm not sure what that is. Anyway, it's in here.
Maybe I wonder if it goes back to like the Sadducees, like I don't know. Obedience of some way.
Maybe. Prudence, temperance, resolution, truth, liberty, diligence, hope, valor. Those are all great things.
Yeah.
Very cool. Those were from the Duke of Burgundy.
Ron Burgundy.
That's right. He made those. So I want to talk a little about the end of chivalry.
Okay.
Well, what's the end of this knight era of chivalry? So the practice of like knighthood started to die out, and it kind of in the 1480s, late 1480s was the end of the Middle Ages, and that's when they really started to train infantrymen to be more on the front lines of the battle as opposed to knights. And during this was obviously well before World War I, but during the 19th century, they tried to have like a revival of this code of chivalry and knighthood. The first German, and one of the interesting things is a sword is always associated with knighthood. So one of the things about knighthood that I'll talk about in a little bit is martial prowess. Martial prowess. So martial meaning like warfare. It's like martial law, right?
Yeah.
So and then prowess is like your abilities, your great abilities. And so martial prowess was a very big part of chivalry, and it was like, romanticized, So a sword was kind of a part of that martial prowess. And interesting, the first German killed in World War I was by a British cavalry sword. So they tried to bring back, like I said, the knights and chivalry and whatnot, following World War I, but many of the popular feelings about war had, that dynamic had changed. As a material reflection of this process, the dress sword lost its position as an indispensable part of a gentleman's wardrobe. A development described as an archaeological terminus by Edward Oakeshott, as it concluded the long period during which the sword had been a visible attribute of a free man, beginning as early as 3 millennia ago with the Bronze Age sword. I love that. That the sword was
a symbol of a
visible
free man.
attribute of a free man.
That's cool.
And so these dress swords, they're still used today, you'll notice that in many military ceremonies, they will have dress swords. I have, for some reason, I got from Grandpa when he died, Marine Corps dress sword.
Replica.
Well, I mean, it's a dress sword, so it's not really. I mean, it can be used during. It's a ceremonial.
I guess a dress sword probably isn't like
it's not used in
battle ready.
It's not used. Some of them could be used in battle. Most of the modern ones are not made to be used in battle. They're only made to look nice. But they're kind of interesting, that whole swords and how they were no longer used because a gentleman wasn't someone that was on the front line. Those are the grunts. And
wouldn't that be cool if it's like, it's like if that was in modern day, it's like part of your prom ensemble is like a
sword,
like your sword, like a dress sword.
That'd be cool.
Right, that'd be cool.
That'd be awesome. But you think about like in the Wild West, you had your holsters.
That's
you
true.
Had your guns
it was
in your
kind
holsters.
of the sign of a free man, right?
It was a sign of a free man, and so that's interesting. I like that kind of revival, and then I love that image of being a symbol of a free man.
Yeah, there's a story that was really interesting. There's a guy named John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill.
Oh, that's a mouthful.
Yeah. So he was a British army officer who fought in the Second World War. So this is like, mid?
Oh, didn't he storm Normandy with a sword in hand?
So he fought in World War II with a longbow, bagpipes, and a Scottish broadsword. And so he actually there's a picture where you could see him storming, I think it might have been Normandy, but storming the beach with a sword in his hand.
Yeah.
Like, dude, during World War II, where the Germans are shooting machine guns at you, and you're running up the beach with a sword. Dude, that's awesome.
I don't know whether that's like incredibly foolish or incredibly badass.
Yeah, I don't know. I just thought that was kind of cool. He died in 1996.
Wow, 96? Yeah. He must have been a young lad then.
Yeah, well, he was an officer. I mean, so when was World War II? I mean, World War II was the 40s,
late mid 40s.
And so if he was, 20 years old, then he would have been 70, 80 in 96.
Interesting.
Or maybe if he lived until, he was 90, 100 years old, then he would have been 30.
Yeah.
40.
Well, 96. When I think 96, I think that's like 5 years ago.
Yeah, that's true.
Like that was really like
we were like under 10 years old.
Yeah, that was so long ago. So it's weird how time is, That was, 30 years ago? Did that?
Yeah.
So,
well, no, not quite, but almost.
I have a story here. So this is one of the romance novels. So like I said, they would write a lot of stories about knights and chivalry knights. And so there was some these names I'm going to butcher, but there's a writer called De Troyes. His romances were pretty straightforward and to the point, but in one of them, that would kind of qualify as a romantic caution of knights neglecting their chivalric duties. In Eric and Ndie, a young knight named Eric is E-R-E-C, that's why I'm saying it weird. Eric, I don't know, is so in love with his young wife that he cannot tear himself away from his marital bed. Serious problems there. He forgoes his martial prowess, which is what I spoke about earlier, your military prowess or power, entirely too occupied to go to fight as a knight should. However, by neglecting his prowess, he loses his reputation. He puts in danger his wife's love for him, and the rest of the romance consists of the adventures he undertakes to regain his prowess, which equals the love of his wife. The hero achieves the right balance in his life between the love of fighting and the love of a woman to whom he has dedicated himself. So
interesting.
It's kind of being out of balance, and then he refines that balance in his duty.
I wonder if there's a certain aspect of martial prowess nowadays that is maybe not considered so much physically carrying a weapon, but being able to handle yourself in physical situations.
Yeah.
Whether that's training in certain martial arts or, I don't know. I just kind of thought that when you're talking about martial prowess, that kind of popped into my head.
Well, yeah. I think there's a quote that says something like, maybe Jordan Peterson said that, like, the man who is incapable of harming another man is not virtuous in any way. It's the man who is capable of harming another person, but doesn't decides to control himself is virtuous.
Yeah. I think I've seen that before.
So, okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say another one that I had was Sir William Wallace.
He was a knight?
Yeah. So he so this is the story, well, let's say Braveheart is loosely based off of William Wallace, right? William Wallace was a Scottish knight and national hero who fought his country's independence. He fought for his country's independence against England. And Scotland was his country, right? The English and the Scottish were always at odds, going back and forth, and there was massive wars at this time. But his first attack of note was against the Lanark in Scotland, which was an English stronghold. There was an English sheriff there who was killed during this revenge of the mistreatment of William Wallace's wife, Marin. And so the English sheriff at that specific location, it was a English stronghold in Scotland, had mistreated William Wallace's wife. And so in defense of women, right, which is a knightly thing, he went and he gathered men and he attacked the stronghold. And somehow the sheriff just ended up dying. Right?
And that was probably the point all along, right?
Yeah. And so, and that's according to legend, right? There's some legend around that. But basically, after several great triumphs of battle between William Wallace and his men, William was actually knighted by Robert the Bruce, who was the future king of Scotland at the time. And so that's when he became Sir William Wallace. And he was actually deemed, he became what was, quote unquote, the guardian of the Scottish government. Until later on, he was, there was some different things that went on, betrayals and things like that from Scottish, not royalty, but kind of nobility to the English and different things. And he ended up getting captured and then drawn and quartered and all that good stuff by the English. But just an interesting story about how it kind of started off as he was, living this code of conduct in support of the independence of his country.
Yeah.
Right. One of the ones we talked about before is, commandment number 4 in the 10 Commandments of Chivalry is love of your country, and he did that, and he used his martial prowess to support the honor or defend the honor of his wife who'd been insulted. In the movie, she got killed. I don't know if she was killed in real life, but.
So the story that I have is kind of a cool story, and it's a cool concept that I like, and it's echoed in many other cultures around the world. So have you ever heard of the Oriflamme?
Yes, but I would not be able to tell you what it was.
So it is a multi-level marketing company, but that's not what I'm talking about.
Oh, okay.
The Oriflamme is a pointed blood red banner with flown from like a gilded lance. It's like a golden lance.
A blood red banner, like a pointed like triangle.
It's a triangle that points down, and it has multiple points. So it's like multiple triangles, and it was a battle standard of the King of France in the Middle Ages. It was used as a sacred banner in warfare, and the legend goes that the banner was born by Charlemagne himself in the whole. He had it, not born. It was born as in it was shown by Charlemagne.
Held.
In the Holy Land, and when he conquered. So when the Oriflamme was raised in battle by a French royalty during the Middle Ages, most nobility so there was like a period called the 100-Year Wars. So when they would raise this banner, it meant that no prisoners were to be taken until it was lowered. So it was basically saying its red color being a symbol of cruelty and ferocity. Through this tactic, they were hoped to strike fear into the hearts of the enemy, especially the nobles, who could usually expect to be taken alive for ransom during some military encounters.
It's kind of like I've seen this on different places and social media and stuff. It's like the black flag.
No quarter.
This is no quarter given.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what it was. Is no quarter. There's no mercy here. And so it's very feared. If you saw this banner, there's no surrender. You're dead. So the bearer of the standard was called the Porte Oriflamme. Became an office and a great honor, as it was an important and a very dangerous job to take charge of such a visible symbol in the battle. If things went badly, the bearer was expected to die rather than relinquish his charge. So, this was obviously, if you saw this thing being raised in battle, you wanted to take that thing out. You don't want to let your flag fall. So this story is about the story of Joffrey de Carney, or de Carney, I'll say. He was considered the perfect knight at the time. Sir Joffrey de Carney, he lived from 1300 to 1356, was considered the perfect French knight. His loyalty, martial prowess, and other military achievements made him a true perfect knight. Joffrey de Carney had once written that he, quote, "He who achieves more is more worthy." I don't know if I entirely agree with that, but that was what he espoused. In his last battle, it was the Battle of the Poitiers between England and French in 1356. And he, at the age of 55, he was the standard bearer for the sacred silken oriflamme, and he was forced to fight to the death holding it alongside the king and the king's son. So this is kind of a scene the scene was described by one, in the history books. This is how it was described. There, Sir Joffrey de Carney fought gallantly near the king, and also the king's 14-year-old son. The whole press and cry of battle were upon him because he was carrying the king's sovereign banner, the oriflamme. He also had before him his own banner, gules and escutcheons argent, which I think are more like family crests. So many English and the Gascons came around him from all sides that they cracked open the king's battle formation and smashed it. There were so many English and Gascons that at least 5 of them, these men at arms, attacked one of French gentlemen's. Sir Joffrey de Carney was killed with the banner of France in his hand, as the other French banner fell to the earth. So he died holding that banner.
He couldn't let it go.
Couldn't let it go because it was, he basically died serving and holding that banner until his last day. So when you think about the importance of a banner, and I think this is, when we talk about a personal creed or a banner, what does that mean to you? We think about the Star Spangled Banner. We sing that song when Francis Scott Key woke up and he saw that the banner was still waving and the banner was still up. What was that a symbol of? And that those men said, "We will not let that banner fall."
Yeah. Or I also like the terminology of a standard.
Yeah.
Right. It's the standard bearer. Right.
Yep.
The person that holds the flag, that holds the banner, and that's, standard. Those are someone's standards. That's what they live by, what they die by.
Exactly. Or you think about the Roman eagles and how sacred those Roman eagles were.
The golden eagle.
When they lost some of them, and it was so coveted, or such a shame to lose those. They lost one in Britannica, basically, and then they went go find it. And so very interesting. I think is an example of the knight's chivalry because he lived by his code. And he ended up dying with that banner in hand, dying for what he believed in. I think, I can see where you can maybe see it the other way, where he's like a 55-year-old man. He's kind of cushy. He's standing next to the king. Who would have thought that the battle would have come that far? But,
when the time
came, he fought. It was kind of like Sir Jarrell Mormont, fighting right next to Khaleesi till the bitter end.
Till the last minute, yeah.
Oh, spoiler alert, by the way.
Oh, jeez.
Ruined that one. So I do have one more story here, but I want to hear yours.
Yeah, I was just going to say one other one that I had was, and actually this is a example of chivalry from a woman. So this one that I had was Joan of Arc.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know a whole bunch about Joan of Arc, but she was nicknamed the Maid of Orleans. And so she was considered a heroine of France in her role during the 100-Year War between France and England. She was also later named a saint, which is interesting as well. So Joan of Arc, she was young, so she said that she received visions from the Archangel Michael, Saint Margaret, and Saint Catherine of Alexandria, instructing her that she should go to Charles the Seventh, and so who was the upcoming king of France, and support him in his recovery of France from English domination. And so she went to the king, or the to-be king. Mm-hmm. He hadn't been christened yet or whatever. He was going to be king. She was like 17 years old, and he was 26. And so she goes to him, and she says, I had these visions, and I'm here to help you, and yada, yada. And so he goes, okay, well, we've been trying to attack this city of Orleans for a long time, and we need reinforcements. So that he sent reinforcements, and she was part of those reinforcements. And they went to the city, and because of some of her strategies and orders, they were able to take the city. That, and then kind of in the next couple years, there was some additional swift victories that led to Charles the Seventh, ended up eventually leading to his consecration as king. But a couple of things I didn't really, and she was pivotal in all of those victories, and really kind of the fighting off of English dominance in France. And so a couple of things that I thought was interesting is that she was remembered as a fearless warrior of the 100-Year War, but she never actually fought in battle or killed an opponent, which is kind of interesting.
Didn't you just say she was part of the battle to conquer the city?
So she was, but was really interesting. And when you see like movies and stuff like that, she's always like carrying a sword and fighting and stuff like that. But it says instead she would accompany her men as a sort of inspirational mascot, and she would brandish her banner in the place of a weapon. So she was kind of like the standard bearer, and she would go into battle, but she wasn't like actively fighting and attacking and charging the ladder, charging the walls and stuff like that. But she was in the midst of the fight. She was mostly responsible for outlining military strategies and directing troops. And also one thing that she was pivotal in was proposing diplomatic solutions to the English, which the English didn't accept any of them, but she was in like the political diplomatic area. So this was for the next 2 years. So when she was 19, she was captured, and then they ended up burning her at the stake and yada, yada, yada.
Really?
Yeah. So one thing that was interesting, though, is that she never actually like fought in battle, but she was wounded twice. It said despite her normal distance from the front lines, she was wounded twice. Once taking an arrow to the shoulder during the Battle of Orleans, and then also next she took a crossbow bolt to the thigh during another battle.
Ouch.
Yeah. So it's just kind of interesting. I think it's she was so young, right? But she just commanded this leadership that people followed her, and she
sounds like a mystic leadership as well. Kind of like a religious leader.
Yeah, because she had
prophetess.
had some of these visions. She at least she said she did, and she had the support from the to-be king that he sent her out to help win these victories, and she did. She was pivotal.
It's funny. It's funny what kind of things, we've talked about lots of different things that motivate people in the heat of battle, like the Battle of Isandlwana. I talked about the solar eclipse and how it made the Zulu warriors even more ferocious, or like a religious leader that's there egging them on, or a standard bearer of the oriflamme that goes up and they know that this is it and their enemies just cower. So it's like this mix of intimidation and inspiration and the samurais and their masks to scare the enemy, and it's just wild how many different ways there are to inspire, intimidate, and win a battle.
Yeah, for sure. But I thought that was a cool story.
Yeah, that's a cool story. So one of the ones I have here, this is kind of a fun one. Well, the other ones are fun, but this is kind of a silly one. But this guy, Don Pero Niao, I think that's how you sound his name. But he was kind of a character. He first joined in, his first taste of battle was at age 15. This is in the year 1378 to 1453. So over the course of a long career, he would fight against the Portuguese, the North African Muslims, the English, carrying out constant raids along the south coast of England and Jersey. He would typically use a crossbow when not at sea, but then he would often show off his talents with a lance as a formidable jouster, earning his such celebrity status that he managed to successfully woo the widow of a recently deceased admiral of France. So in 1403, he was wounded in battle and suffered and he was wounded on his leg, and he refused to abandon the campaign. He's like, no, I'm not going to leave. I'm not going to leave. So soon thereafter, that when they arrived back to Spain, his leg wound had started to fester, and the doctors recommended that if we need to amputate your leg, if you want to survive. So Don Pero Niao, however, refused. Instead, he asked that they cauterize the wound, singeing the flesh with a white hot iron instead, The surgeon agreed, but at the last moment refused to perform the procedure, not wanting to inflict the degree of pain they knew it would cause. But Pero Niao, by now, was a master of inflicting and sustaining physical pain, grabbed the iron from him and applied it to himself, rubbing it up and down the length of his leg. Imagine that. He spent the latter years of his life, apart from being brief interlude of being exiled, serving the Spanish monarchy, and died at a remarkably old age for a knight who had lived so rashly.
So it worked.
Yeah, worked. Keeps his legs. Crazy, right?
Massive burn marks.
Yeah, but I'd rather have a bunch of scars than no leg at all, right?
Yeah, because that probably would have been just as life-threatening than the issue at hand.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's pretty... That's pretty wild, brave, I guess, to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I think some of these guys are tough, man. I mean, it's just, living then was just so much harder, too. I mean, it was... They didn't have the same luxuries that we have today. They didn't have, I don't know, central air and heat and air, They didn't have all the cushy mattresses and everything else. I mean, it was just different lifestyle.
Yeah.
But I guess you get used to anything.
Yeah. And
you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, exactly. I was watching that one. When I was reading this, I was thinking about that scene in Lost. Remember when Charlie gets hit in the head? One of the characters, he gets hit in the head by something. I think it was by a character named Ethan, because they discovered that he was one of the others, and so they were trying to find him, and then so he wakes up and he's like, oh man, and he got this giant gash in his forehead, and they're like, oh, you got to go back. He's like, I'm not going back, and so the doctor Jack, he takes a bullet, he takes it apart. No, I think it was John Locke who did this, and he pours it into all the gunpowder in there, and he lights it and it goes. And it burns his head. I don't know if that would exactly work, because I think the wound would probably wet the gunpowder.
Actually, I saw there's that one survival show, Dual Survival.
Yeah,
where it has the one kind of like a military guy, and then the other is like kind of like a
hippie guy.
Like
naturalist.
A survivalist, naturalist guy. Well, the one military guy, he wants to prove that you can do that, and so he actually like takes his forearm and he cut like a 3-inch gash in his forearm, and he dumped the gunpowder in there, and he did it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure.
I imagine that would leave a mean scar, though.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure he would have massive. He probably went to the hospital and got it taken care of whenever they got back from filming. But yeah.
But anyway, yeah, I remember that.
So the last thing I wanted to talk about with chivalry, I wanted to quickly talk about modern day chivalry. Right, you've probably heard the quote a million times: "Chivalry is dead." Right, a lot of people like to say that. I don't think it is. I think maybe some of the aspects of chivalry has changed. I think there's lots of groups that it's really confusing. Let's say some of these like feminist groups are like, we don't need men for anything or yada yada. And then I remember I opened a door for a lady one time and she was like, I can do it myself. It's just like,
yeah,
okay.
And I one time I didn't open the door for someone. I just we were walking out. I just kind of pushed the door open and expected her to kind of also put her hand out was when you were walking. And then she didn't, so the door kind of closed on her, and she's like, oh, my gosh, why didn't you hold the door for me? And I was like...
Yeah, how dare you?
Yeah.
It's
like, what are we supposed to do?
It is so confusing. That's kind of what I wanted to talk about, is it's like this, we've talked about this several times on the podcast of this toxic masculinity or whatever else. And I think part of masculinity is chivalry. And men are literally built to be defenders. We are defenders of those who are not as strong. And I'm just going to come out and say it, on average, women are not as strong and as big as men are. And so that's why typically men are the defenders. And it's not to belittle anyone. I think that's just how.
Also, it's like kind of defenders of beauty. That's part of the Code of Chivalry as well. And like, respecter of beauty and
yeah. And so I think there's a couple things, this chivalry is defined by these qualities held by these knights as being gentlemen, offering courage and honor and protecting women. I think all those things are such good things, but they kind of get lost. And it's just so confusing nowadays because back then that was like expected. Mm-hmm. But now it's like you run into strangers in the street and it's like, well, do I open the door for them or do I not open the door for them? Like, are they going to feel like, are they going to get triggered or offended because I'm trying to do something, that they could do for themselves or whatever else? And it's just a very confusing time.
Yeah. I think it also depends on the part of the country you're in.
I think it definitely does.
In the South, I have not run into that very much. But when you're in more like, honestly, liberal areas, people are gonna say weird stuff like that, or I've seen military men in government questioning situations, and then they say yes ma'am, and don't call me ma'am, you better call me sir, and he's just like okay.
Yeah, he's like, but you're a woman, I'm gonna call you ma'am,
because that's a respectful
thing.
But like,
well, it's like we grew up saying yes ma'am and no ma'am, and I remember I had one of my friends. I think I've shared the story before, but they were from the north. They moved down from New York, and he was in my class, and we kind of became friends and stuff. And his parents took me home from school one day, and I got in the car, and his mom was like, hey, do you need me to are you comfortable back there, or do I need to scoot my seat up? And I was like, yeah, and I said, yes, ma'am, or something like that. She asked me a question. I said, yes, ma'am, and his dad was like, oh man, that is so awesome. That is so cool. You say yes, ma'am. And he's like, you look at my friend, you need to learn from this guy and everything else. And it was just like, because it's a show of respect. But a couple things that I just had pointed out, this is some examples I found online. A man who stands in front of his wife and child during a robbery is an example of chivalry, right? Are there some men that would maybe cower behind their wives? I think there is. Or a man who opens his date's car door, as an example of chivalry. And it's just a respect of women. And I think, too, it can be a respect of if you're walking out, you can hold the door for another man. I think that's chivalrous, too. It's kind of like that that knight's code, defending the honor of someone else's knighthood.
Of your fellow knight, yeah.
So the last example that I had was you were talking about bringing chivalry back. And we had a whole episode where we talked about the Boy Scouts of America program. And that was one of the goals of the guy who founded the scouting for boys, is what they called it, but it founded this scouting program. He was a British Army Lieutenant General, Robert Baden-Powell, and he kind of founded these ideas of instilling some of these chivalrous attributes and tactics into everyday lives of boys and growing. And I think that's definitely something. I mean, obviously they they included a bunch of other learning and everything else that goes along with it. But I think that's another example of kind of a modern day chivalry where they're trying to bring it back. And so the question is, how can we apply some of these tactics and strategies of chivalry in our own personal lives and our own personal creeds and in the developing of
Our kids.
Yeah,
and I think some of this stuff, I think definitely take it. Some of these things obviously take it, like, helping to give succor to the widows and the orphans, refrain from wanton giving of offense, to live by honor and for glory, fighting for the welfare of all. These are all great, noble things. We've gone through these in this episode. Some of them, like, killing the infidels or without question. Maybe that's...
Be careful with that one.
Yeah, maybe you could be a little bit careful with that one, but maybe not, leave that one out of your creed, or maybe adjust that to, don't let people threaten my family or something like that.
I think a lot of the things, too, when it says, like, fight against this and fight against that, and maybe back then it was talking specifically fighting, like physically fighting, but I think also fighting could be, emotional fighting or fighting in with your vote.
Or going to the school board meeting and saying, why are we doing this?
Yeah, exactly.
So hopefully there's been a lot of good stuff shared in this episode that you can incorporate into your creed. I know that there's lots of things that inspired me, and I think that I'd like to instill in my boys this chivalrous activity, respect for their just all mankind, and so that they can be honorable men. And also to think about that, what's your oriflame? What is your standard that you are ready to die holding in your hand, that you're ready to fight to the last breath to hold in your hand to keep that standard high? If your family is behind you and you're fighting in a battle and you're keeping a standard up, what is it that you're going to teach until the day that you die? What is that important to you? And that's something we should all think about.
Yeah, for sure. What will you be known for?
What is your creed?
Yeah. Share your creed with us. We would love to hear your creed.
Yeah.
We'd love to hear what aspects you've gotten from some of our episodes, and we'd love to hear some of the ones that maybe you've built within your own families.
Yeah.
So share them with us.
Well, thanks for listening today, guys. Appreciate you as always. We always love hearing feedback, and love your comments. So follow us on the socials, and let's build that creed together.
All right, let's do it.